Imagine the smell that lingers in the air after a big rainstorm. How do you describe it? Earthy, kind of musky, maybe just like rain. You know the smell, but can you put it into words? With sight, it's easy to categorize. Bananas are yellow, stop signs are red, windows are translucent. But when it comes to smell, our vocabularies falter. Besides a handful of words, it's hard to describe a scent without using analogy. It smells like cinnamon, or it's kind of fishy. Take a second. How many ways can you describe a smell without referring to the source? I'll wait. That scarcity of words is a semantic issue, not a sensory one. We have hundreds of olfactory receptors in our noses and can differentiate as many as 1 trillion different odors. And yet, there are so few categories for all those fragrances. Historically, lots of people thought that our sense of smell wasn't all that important, perhaps because we don't have that many words for it and aren't that great at naming odors. Immanuel Kant considered it to be the most ungrateful and most dispensable of our 5 senses. Charles Darwin said it's of extremely slight service, and philosopher P.F. Strawson deemed the sense strikingly more trivial than the others. And recent studies have shown that 1/4 of college students would rather have their phones than their sense of smell. But those are all people from the Western world. And by now, we should know that you can't generalize about the whole world based on a few languages and cultures. You smell what I'm cooking? I'm Dr. Erica Brozovsky, and this is Otherwords.
Otherwords.
While our eyes only have 3 types of color receptors, red, blue, and green, we can reliably categorize things into several abstract basic color terms with high consensus among speakers. In other words, we have high codability when it comes to colors. Codability is a measure of how easily, quickly, and consensually speakers of a language can name a concept. High codability indicates a commonly agreed upon name, whereas low codability suggests, well, the opposite. When it comes to pitch, we have clear categories too, though the words differ between languages. In English, I think of high versus low. In Farsi, Turkish, and Zapotec, the corresponding pitches are thin and thick. For the krung of Cambodia, it's tight versus loose. And for the kapel of Liberia, light versus heavy. My personal favorite is one of the ways the Shona of Zimbabwe describe pitch on the mbira. Crocodile, low, versus those who follow crocodile, high. But is scent ineffable? Is it really unable to be put into words? For linguists, the study of olfaction and olfactory language examines how different languages lexicalize their perception of odor, how speakers describe smells in experimental tasks, and how the patterns relate to cultural or semantic systems more broadly. Essentially, what do people say about smells and how do they say it? In English and many other Western languages, descriptions of smells are reliant on source-based expressions and evaluations. Experimental studies have shown that English and Dutch speakers will often identify an odor by naming its presumed source, such as banana, garlic, cinnamon, or resorting to vague labels like nice, disgusting, or even weird, rather than specific olfactory descriptors. You and I might agree that something smells like the beach or smells like a hospital, but that's really just a shortcut for a bunch of associations. Salt, fish, tanginess, and sunscreen versus disinfectant, plastic, anxiety, and sterile air. Interestingly, while we don't have a large fragrance vocabulary in English, odor still manages to pop up occasionally in everyday speech. There are lots of smell-based metaphors and idioms. Follow your nose. Something smells fishy. I'll sniff around. I smell a rat. That stinks. Wake up and smell the coffee, or stop and smell the roses. I wonder why. Maybe it's because even though we can't see odor, we can definitely sense it. So it can serve as an effective metaphor for hidden problems or motives or even subtle changes in atmosphere. While I may struggle to describe scents in English, there are a number of languages around the world where scents are as easily describable and categorizable as colors. Linguists Asfa Majid and Nicholas Bernholt conducted olfactory studies with the Jahai, a group of indigenous hunter-gatherers who live in the rainforests of the Malay Peninsula. They found that Jahai has 12 general terms that capture the different qualities of smell. Much like we use the word yellow to describe the color of bananas and sunflowers, the Jahai use one word, ha'ed, for the smells associated with rotten meat, feces, burnt hair, lighter gas, and shrimp paste, among other things. Or chungus for gasoline, smoke, and bat guano. Or pu'us for the smell common to old dwellings, cooked cabbage, and stale food. Sure, they're all stinky with my limited English odor vocabulary, but to the Jahai, there's a lot of nuance in there. Now, how do linguists study something so ephemeral as smell? One common method is fieldwork using standardized odors. Participants are given scents, often in the form of a pen, imagine one with a scent instead of with ink, and asked to identify, describe, or rate the odor. Researchers measure variables like reaction time, agreement across speakers, and how they're described, whether with a source label or an abstract descriptive term. Observed patterns can indicate how strongly or weakly olfactory categories are conventionalized in a speech community. In a study that compared speakers of Jahai and Dutch, the Jahai participants collectively gave 22 responses to the scents, while the Dutch participants came up with 707 different responses to the same scents. Clearly, the Jahai were on the same page, while the Dutch didn't really have collective agreement when it came to the odors. The Jahai speakers were also much faster and more succinct in their responses. In other words, the Jahai speakers had high lexical codability for odors, and for the Dutch, it's low. Other studies of the Aslian languages of the Malay Peninsula, including Manik, Selamakberi, and Smelly, showed similarly rich dedicated olfactory lexicons. Smelly was particularly nuanced with 24 different abstract odor terms, ranging from the balsamic odors of flowers and resins to the wafting odor of large, strong-smelling fruits like durian and jackfruit, and the difference between urine and other similar ammonia-like odors and the smell of concentrated, stale urine. Odor serves as a culturally relevant sensory channel for communicating everyday life. This is not exclusive to the Aslian languages, nor to the Malay Peninsula. In Mexico, researchers have found that Huehuetla Tepehuа has 45 different olfactory idiophones, or words that depict sensory imagery or experiences. Chapala, spoken by the Chachi people in northern Ecuador, has 15 basic smell terms. And most excitingly, to a linguist at least, is that the abstract smell terms are all formed with a morpheme, which means that smells are in their own grammatical category. There is some suggestion that communities that rely heavily on olfactory clues for things like foraging or navigating or ritual might have more odor words and talk about smell more often. But to be clear, this is not just a hunter-gatherer thing. Thai, with tens of millions of speakers, also has a rich vocabulary of words for odors. And the Onji of the Andaman Islands greet each other with, "How is your nose?" So when psychologist Howard Gardner declared that a keen olfactory sense has little special value across cultures, he was clearly mistaken. Corpus-based olfactory studies look at how smell-related terms are used in corpora of spoken or written material. Researchers can see what emotions or situations show up in relation to specific words like miasmic, aromatic, stinky, or fragrant. They might find, for example, that certain words have a strong association with danger or nostalgia or luxury, or that there's a specialized vocabulary for sommeliers and perfumers that the average person would be unlikely to use when encountering a scent. There are some areas where people try to push olfactory language further. Think with wine tasting. Yes, in this Tempranillo I sense notes of cherry, leather, and tobacco. Or coffee. This bean's got a bright acidity, floral aroma, chocolatey finish. Perfume. The sharp greenery of tuberose features a camphoraceous spice underneath a strong creaminess. In these communities, people are deliberately practicing naming fragrances, comparing them, and inventing or refining terminology. Over time, it creates a more detailed, shared vocabulary within that niche. But interestingly, studies have shown that those linguistic skills don't translate into other domains. Wine experts are no better than regular people at describing the nuances of coffee or other smells. Low codability, if you will. Once in a while, we'll get on the same page about a specific smell. Remember the smell in the air after a big rainstorm? There's actually a word for it. Petrichor. It was coined in 1964 by Australian scientists Isabel Joy Baer and Richard Grenfell Thomas, from the ancient Greek petra for rock and ichor for blood of the gods. And the word made its way into more popular usage after being prominently featured in a 2011 episode of Doctor Who.
Petrichor. 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 Petrichor.
If you think about it, odors are a sign in olfactory code. So developing olfactory language might just help us better understand what was under our noses all along. Categorizable, 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 categorizable.
Just go slow.
I'm trying. Categorizable.
We can go from your
Okay. Meh, meh, meh.
Today?